The mythology of Santa Claus. And is he really Odin? So, my friends, it's that time of year again. Welcome to a special episode of Deity Tracker where we will be tracing the mythological origins of, yes, the god of Christmas. No, not that god of Christmas, not Jesus, the red one, the fat one, the jolly one. That's it, the Yule father, Saint Nick, or otherwise known as Santa Claus. So, my friends, at this time of year, there's always a debate, isn't there? Quite a polarised and ill thought out one. Santa Claus, is he Odin? Is he not Odin? And quite often some quite reductive reasoning on both sides making this argument. So I want to talk a little bit about the sort of deeper roots and origins of Santa Claus or the Christmas man, and see if there is any crossover between the Norse god Odin and some older iterations or influences on the Santa Claus figure that we all know and love today. If we're going to ask the direct question, is Santa Odin? Obviously the answer is no. Santa, Odin is Odin. Santa Claus is a very modern concept, probably arose in the form today in the modern era, in the 19th century, and in the USA. He obviously has older European influences and origins, which I'll get onto. Normally when we talk about Odin, we're talking about the Norse god Odin from the sagas. And normally when I see people trying to debunk this idea of there being any element of Odin standing behind the modern Santa Claus, they're normally focusing on just the Odin of the Norse sagas rather than earlier archetypal images and religious and shamanic figures that might have fed into the Odin figure we know today. He's probably a very old god. And also, of course, later versions of Odin after the sagas in later Northern European folklore, where there is a little bit more crossover with this Yuletide figure. If you want to know why Santa Claus is not Odin, there's a very good YouTube video that you've probably already been recommended to. It's by Jackson Crawford. Great guy, very good on Norse linguistics. Sometimes when he's talking outside of his sort of field of study, in my opinion, he slightly makes kind of assumptions and gets things a bit wrong. In my opinion, I do as well. So don't take anyone's word for any of this. Do your own research. Do your own find your own sources. But yeah, my problem with this Odin Santa debate is it's so, this is a word I use a lot on this channel, it's so reductive. It's just a symptom of our modern age and wanting to find easy answers for things. Santa, Odin, tick, done. There, boom. Ha, take that, Christians. Or on the other side, the debunkers. No, it's not because of this, and then some really bad reasoning. Therefore, there's no Odin at all in the Santa mix. So what I would like to do today is talk about some of the deeper influences in Santa Claus and where Odin might actually fit into that. And also maybe some common misunderstandings or reasons why Santa isn't really Odin. So Santa Claus, I'm sure you already know this, but Santa Claus is a very modern phenomena born in the United States of America. I think in New York, there were a few poems written, the most famous being The Night Before Christmas, which kind of canonized the image of Santa that we have today. There he is giving gifts to children with his reindeer, with a lot of his iconography. And then in the 1930s, there was a popular image commissioned by the Coca-Cola company that took elements of The Night Before Christmas and sort of canonized it visually with the red jacket and the white fur, the kindly red-faced man with the white beard. That then kind of became set as Santa Claus. And that then kind of traveled across the world and kind of almost re-pollinated other older European versions of the Christmas man. So there are multiple European blueprints for the contemporary American Santa Claus. I would say, perhaps I'm biased because I'm English, but I would say the most obvious one, certainly in terms of imagery, is our English Father Christmas, which is a much older personification of the winter season, particularly its jollity. We see images of Father Christmas going right back to the Puritan age. Oliver Cromwell and his Puritans after the English Civil War, they literally banned Christmas. That's how fun-hating the Puritans were. When Christmas was banned, there was a resurgence in this idea of the embodiment, the personification of Christmas and all the things that the Puritans banned: drinking, cavorting, fun. The interesting thing about this Father Christmas figure is a lot of his imagery seems to echo earlier, quote unquote, sort of pagan archetypal images of the holly, of the personification of winter and the Yule season, which is very, 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 very old. We've been celebrating the winter solstice in this country for, I don't know, at least 6,000 years, going all the way back to Stonehenge and the feasts and festivities at the winter solstice, celebrating the rebirth of the sun at that time of year. Probably, we don't really know. And of course, you know, Germanic traditions and Norse traditions coming in with the Anglo-Saxons and the Norse for Yule, again, which is a pre-Christian festival where a lot of the practices that we still have today, like present giving and bringing holly into the house or other evergreens, have their pre-Christian roots and origins and symbolism. We've just carried it on into Christmas. I love it when Christians try to deny that there are pagan roots in Christmas, because it's literally on historical record. So this character of Father Christmas, normally he's wearing green, but sometimes red in the later images. By later, I mean maybe the Victorian age. The Victorians really brought this Christmas idea back. And a lot of the traditions we celebrate around the world today are from the Victorian age, the 19th century. And, for example, the work of Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol and his Spirit of Christmas Present. If you look at a contemporary illustration of the Spirit of Christmas Present, there he is in his fur-lined robes, wearing green, a sort of ruddy red brown beard. He's almost bacchanalian, isn't he? He's almost like Dionysus. He's the spirit of misrule. Spirit of misrule is another ancient pagan thing, probably celebrated during Saturnalia with the Romans. I'll get back to Saturnalia in a minute. But this, this joy, up yours to the Puritans. We're going to drink as much as we want, be merry, spread good cheer. We literally see this woodcut from the 1600s, probably the earliest image of Father Christmas, or I think Sir Christmas, as he was known then. So this is the English personification of Father Christmas, of Santa Claus, which is all to do with revelry. This concept of revelry connected to Yule is very, very, very old, and some of the imagery looks kind of pagan in feel. Other European Christmas figures that have fed into the Santa Claus imagery is, of course, Scandinavian or Norse images of this. I used to live in Denmark, where Santa Claus is called Yule Man, the Yule Man, literally the Christmas man, or the Yule Man, or the solstice man. We don't really know what Yule means. Probably just a reference to this Yuletide winter solstice celebration that the Norse and other peoples celebrated. So Yule Man, he's red and white. This has come from earlier Nordic folkloric customs about the Julenisse. These are basically Santa's elves. This is where Santa's elves have come from. And the Nisse are a lot like elves and fae and goblins from across European culture. I've talked a lot about goblins and fairies on this channel. The Scandinavian version are usually red-capped. There's a lot of debate on whether this iconography is perhaps borrowed from the Amanita muscara mushroom, or maybe nearby indigenous shamanic cultures like the Sami and their traditional red dress, normally representing the sun. Almost another tie-in with the solar mythos of this time of year, and maybe even Santa Claus himself. That one might be a bit of a stretch, but there's certainly a correspondence there, if not a direct historic connection. So yeah, the Nisse, these little bearded, white-bearded, red-capped fellows have fed into the iconography of the Yule Man, who is the Danish Father Christmas. I believe in Finland he's called the Yule Goat, another pagan piece of imagery there, probably, although more likely connected to Thor rather than Odin. In fact, Santa Claus does actually physically resemble Thor a lot more than he does Odin, doesn't he, in his sort of jollity and his rotundity and his redness, all kind of Thor-like attributes, you might say. But I guess we're seeing now that the Norse connections are sort of there, but they're not clear cut and not necessarily Odin-like. The other, perhaps main influence behind Santa Claus is, of course, Sinterklaas, the Dutch version of the Christmas man, who takes his main, I don't know about main inspiration, his name certainly from the 6th century bishop, Byzantine bishop of Myra, Saint Nicholas. When people are trying to debunk this pagan origins of Father Christmas theory, they say, actually, he's from Saint Nicholas. No, he's not. There are no reindeer in Turkey. No, that's very reductive reasoning of me. Saint Nicholas, the Christian bishop in the 6th century, the patron saint of children and thieves and prostitutes, ho ho ho, is one of the constellation of influences for the contemporary Santa Claus. Just one, not even the main one. It's far more these northern European traditions and northern European personifications of the Christmas man. One of which is the Dutch Sinterklaas, which of course, takes its name from the 6th century Saint Nicholas. But other elements of this are taken from northern Germanic folklore. So there's Santa Claus. There's just some of the influences that have gone into Santa Claus. Now, what about Odin? What has any of this got to do with Odin? Odin never wears red. Some people say that Odin wore red. There's no reference to this in any Norse source or later folkloric material. Okay, I mean, he does look to be wearing red in this Icelandic medieval manuscript penned by Snorri, but, in the actual sagas, he's not referred to as wearing red. But, look at that. Some people say that Odin's horse, Sleipnir, has 8 legs, and Santa's reindeer there's 8 of them. This to me is a bit dodgy. For once, the reindeer came into the Santa Claus kind of mythos relatively late. Clear differences in appearance. I mean, yes, they're both old men with white beards, but Odin is famously grumpy. He's not jolly. But I have a little caveat here. One of the main reasons to actually equate or link Odin with Santa Claus is one of Odin's names, one of his titles. Odin has about 70 or 80 titles, one of which is the Jolnir, the one who Yules, the Lord of Yule. Kind of makes me think of the Lord of Misrule from Saturnalia. The Yule Lord. So he's clearly associated with this time of year, with the Yule celebrations and with the Winter Solstice and the rebirth of the sun that they are supposedly based on. And there would have been toasts to Odin and other gods, but mainly to Odin. So this is one of the links of Odin with Santa Claus. Odin is associated with Yule, and Father Christmas is literally the human or the personification of Yule. So they're both kind of fulfilling the same role there, arguably. Some people counter this argument and throw shade on it by saying Odin's got loads of names, loads of them, normally quite ferocious and fearful ones. So why just pick one? This is a bit dodgy. I mean, Odin has no other name that refers to a time of year. So to call him the Yuler, he's not also called any other time of year man. So the fact that he is referenced as the Lord of Yule or the Yule god or the Yuler, the one who Yules, is a really strong link, and that's from the actual Norse textual material. So that's a really strong link there. Just peeling back a bit, I said Odin's very, very grumpy, and Santa is usually very, very jolly. In fact, one possible etymology for the word jolly is from the word Yule, because it has always been a time of merrymaking. So Odin, very stern, not very jolly. Santa, very, very jolly. But this time of year, this end of the year, this sun dying at the winter solstice and being reborn a few days later, around December 25th, the birth of Jesus and Sol Invictus. This, in the Roman calendar, was ruled by Saturn, the All-Father, the Roman All-Father, the god of time, the god of endings, the god of following the rules. Saturn has, Odin and Saturn share a lot of characteristics in this regard. But this time of year, in the pagan Roman era, the pre-Christian times, this time from about December the 17th up until the solstice was called Saturnalia. It was called this time because it was the end of the year, so to do with Saturn. But also, it's kind of an inversion of Saturn's sort of attributes. So Saturn, god of the patriarchy, god of rules. At this time of year, everything is thrown out the window. It's 12th night, the 12 days of absolute misrule, the lords of misrule. Everything is turned on its head. Some people, like James Fraser, said there was an appointed slave who was the lord of misrule, and he was given everything and had loads of fun, and everyone would have to do what he said, and then he was sacrificed for the new sun. I don't think there's a lot of historical evidence for this, but mythologically it's wonderful. So what I'm saying is Saturnalia is a time where the normal rules are reversed, and is a time for jollity, right? And yet it's presided over by Saturn. So just to point at Odin as being glum and a bit Saturnalian, you're kind of almost arguing for him being a Christmas god, because the rule of Odin is overturned at Yule, you could argue, when there is all this feasting and merrymaking. There's often a reflection in Roman and Northern customs. Often they're doing a similar thing in a different way. Maybe that's a reason, because we don't know the reason, maybe that's a reason why Odin is associated with Yule, because the usual order with which Odin is associated with, murdered his own grandfather to make the world out of his dismembered body, this ordering function that Odin is associated with, just like Saturn. So there, you could argue there's a link there. So link number one of Odin with Santa Claus, his role as the Jolnir. That's in Norse folklore. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this video, sometimes I think people are going, well, let's look back at the Norse sources. But there are other sources that are post-Norse, like Germanic folklore. Part of this is related to the mythos of Sinterklaas, the Dutch Santa Claus, again, taken from Saint Nicholas, the historic 6th century Turkish bishop, but given Northern European folkloric flavours, he flies through the air on his magic horse, giving gifts to children. This feels a lot like Sleipnir, Odin's horse. Now, in the Norse material that we have, passed down to us by Snorri, Sturluson and Saxo Grammaticus, other sort of just post-Viking sources, Sleipnir doesn't normally fly in the Norse sagas, but he kind of transcends space and time. He kind of travels interdimensionally. I mean, I think that's kind of like flying, isn't it? Odin rides Sleipnir down to hell. I mean, Santa is also, he's not really flying on his sleigh, is he? He's sort of interdimensionally traveling. He transcends space and time, doesn't he? So a correlation there, you might argue. In later Dutch folklore as well, this is recorded by Jacobs Grimm and others earlier in the Netherlands. This was a historical custom of children leaving carrots and treats in their shoes outside for Odin's horse Sleipnir that would come and give them presents. Now, as I say, Odin doesn't give children presents in the Norse sagas, absolutely not. He does give gifts, but normally like, I don't know, the mead of poetry and wisdom, or warriors' swords, so they die for him in battle and come and join him in the great end of days, Ragnarok, things like that. They're a bit more heavy duty gifts rather than little wooden toys. But Odin does give gifts in the sagas. You could say that's another link, but different sort of gift. But in later folklore, Odin does deliver children gifts on Sleipnir, and they leave Sleipnir gifts of carrots. I did this for Santa's reindeer when I was a kid. Obviously influenced by the American Santa Claus. I don't think that was ever a thing we did for Father Christmas. Father Christmas in English custom normally walks around on his feet, a bit like Odin. So yeah, in later Northern European custom, Odin is said to do a lot of things that look like Santa Claus, flying through the air on Sleipnir, giving presents to kids. is one thing. I think this is from like the 17th or 18th century, so relatively recent, but it's still Odin, right? Odin isn't trapped in the Norse sagas. This is kind of my point. This is what annoys me about mythology. People don't understand that it's a process that has been going on. Odin has his roots possibly in, he might have his roots in the Mesolithic, thousands of years old, as some kind of antlered shamanic figure. That might be the original root of Odin. And he travels through the Norse age where we take a snapshot of him, and people always point to the Norse sagas as Odin, but he's a process. He's a being. He's not a personality from the Norse sagas or a frozen image in time. And as Odin stretches back, he also stretches forward into later folklore of the last few hundred years. Now we come to, I think, for me, what is the main connection between Odin or Odin-like archetypal images and the Christmas man, Santa Claus, and his other archetypal images that stand behind him. It is, of course, the wild hunt, the Lord of the wild hunt, the spectral hunt, the ghostly hunt. This is big. This is probably one of the main connections in terms of correspondences and imagery, archetypal imagery that link the two together. The wild hunt is a big subject. I'm going to do a video on that shortly. I'm in a forest, an ancient bit of British woodland right now, where about a year ago I brought you probably my most successful video on the horned god. The horned god is one of the leaders of the wild hunt in British tradition, called Herne the Hunter. In most traditions of the wild hunt, which, by the way, most of them are from the medieval era, but usually using images or gods from an earlier pre-Christian era. So the leader of the wild hunt, there's so many of them. Sometimes it's Hecate, goddess of witchcraft. Sometimes it's Diana. Sometimes it's King Arthur or some other mythic king leading a ghostly retinue of warriors. And other times, a lot of the time, it's Odin or one of his avatars. In this forest, there is a wild hunt legend. I will tell it on this channel about a squire who goes chasing a white stag through a forest, and he loses his whole fortune, completely obsessed with chasing the stag, loses all his money, neglects his estate, and eventually he finds the white stag going up on the ridgeway, which is over there, and then he suddenly finds himself joined by a whole ghostly cavalcade. The suggestion is he might have died, and then the leader of the hunt turns, and he's wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and he's only got one eye, most likely a reference to Woden rather than Odin, because we're not in that part of Britain. Anglo-Saxons here, Norse up there. So that's just one example of a local, probably quite recent piece of folklore that features an avatar of Woden on the spectral hunt. Now, there's so many different types of the spectral hunt, but normally it's to do with the dead, it's to do with the other world. There are Celtic ancient mythological roots to this. Think of Gwyn ap Nudd, who rides out of the other world with all his ghostly riders. Sometimes they're chasing quarry, sometimes they're not. Sometimes that quarry is a deer, sometimes it's humans, living humans that have been left out at night, that haven't gone inside for the longest night, or for Samhain, or whichever night it is. That's another feature of the wild hunt, of the ghostly hunt. It normally happens on what in Welsh are called spirit nights, which are normally the important points of the year, the solstices, the equinoxes, and the cross-quarter days. The most important of these spirit nights is, of course, Winter Solstice. This is when the sun literally fucking dies. So obviously this is when the spirit gates are open and the ghostly hunt is moving through the sky. The imagery is so similar here that you have to draw a correspondence with that and Santa Claus. Yes, I know Santa Claus is a nice and jolly ghostly hunt, not a negative one, but to claim there's not a correspondence in imagery there, I think is putting your head in the sand. So those are my main links with Odin and Santa Claus. It's Odin as the Jolnir, as the Lord of Yule, and connections between Odin's horse Sleipnir and Saint Nicholas's flying horse, and the leaving gifts for children, which has clearly gone into the contemporary legend of Santa Claus, and this idea of the wild hunt. I suppose you could also mention kind of You could also mention indigenous Siberian influences on Nordic culture. I think I've mentioned that already. Perhaps certain hallucinogenic mushrooms, which also kind of represent the sun and may have influenced some of the red and white trim of Santa Claus's clothing. I don't think there's a actual historical connection there that I can find, no sordid little trail of breadcrumbs, but there's a correspondence in imagery, you might argue. What's that got to do with Odin? Well, Odin is sometimes associated with shamanic night flying, with Seder and that kind of transgressive magic. Again, that's tying back into the sort of Saturnalian thing, because Odin is normally shouldn't, as the Allfather, as a archetype of manhood, shouldn't be engaging in feminine magic and soul flights and shape shifting. And indeed, in the Norse saga, sometimes he's kind of making witches who are doing soul flights lose the connection with their sleeping bodies and things like that. But this shamanic element, which is part of Odin's DNA, you could argue is sort of there in Santa Claus as well, with the iconography of the Amanita muscara. I'll let you decide on that one. I'm not so sure of that one myself. I just like it. So there are some links between Odin and Santa Claus. I hope I've made clear now that any kind of reductive X equals Y answer to this isn't going to make sense. This won't make sense with mythology. If I could use a metaphor, say Santa Claus is a mushroom. Say he's a fly agaric mushroom. That's the contemporary image now, but it's connected to a mycelial network underground, reaching through the forest floor. Say Odin is a tree, this tall oak tree. It would be better if it was a yew or an ash, maybe, like Yggdrasil. Say Odin is that tree, this root network underground. This is the realm of the collective unconscious, is connected to the mycelial network of that mushroom. All we can see in history and literature is the mushroom and the tree, but the links are there, the correspondences, the imagery. So if we're looking at myth, if we're tracking deities and looking at mythologies, we need to keep our peripheral vision open and look at all the little correspondences that might be beneath the forest floor. I hope I'm not pushing this metaphor too far. So, my friend, just before I wrap this video up, if you are interested in this, and contrary to what I was saying at the beginning of the video about the juvenility of trolling our Christian friends and relatives, if you want a Christmas card exploring this idea, I've designed some Christmas cards with kind of my version of the Yule figure. I call him the Yule Man, which is the Danish name for Father Christmas. I've given him horns in a nod to the horned god. I've given him one eye in a nod to Odin. I've peppered the art with the Amanita muscara mushroom because I like the Siberian shamanic connection there. Santa Claus arriving, giving us all a drink of hallucinogenic reindeer wee at Yule. But if you want one of these cards, if you become a Raven Tier Patreon of mine, I will send you one if it is in this Christmas period. Also, I'll put a link there to my partner Tamsin's shop where she sells Christmas decorations and wooden spoons at this time of year, and my Christmas cards will be there should you want to buy a pagan themed Christmas card this year. So my friends, that's all I've got time for. Thank you for all of my Patreons, and if you want to watch another video, perhaps from a non-Christian tradition, celebrating the sun coming to earth in human form, being betrayed and rising again to the Father, from Sami mythology that in some ways echoes the Christmas story, even though it's from an indigenous European tradition with nothing to do with Christianity, then why don't you watch a video I did last year called Archimedes, the Daughter of the Sun? It is a wonderful, wonderful story of hope and forgiveness, which is what we need this time of year. Good Yule, my friends.